Filippo Grandi, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees.
Madam President, delegates, civil society representatives, and colleagues, I recently visited Myanmar and saw how a country already dealing with a devastating humanitarian crisis was still reeling from the aftermath of the recent earthquake. Let me therefore join others in welcoming this conference. You have heard from Special Envoy Julie Bishop about the political challenges. As in other crises, and given the way conflicts are conducted by parties across the country, too often disregarding the rules of war, civilians, as we heard this morning, are killed, wounded, and deprived of the basics. More than 5 million are displaced, of whom more than 1.5 million have taken refuge in neighboring countries. In my own discussions with the de facto authorities in Naypyidaw, I have reiterated the requests of humanitarian agencies on the ground. We need safe and unhindered access to people impacted by the fighting. I have received some assurances, but these urgent and vital asks must be continuously conveyed by all those who can do so. Within the broader context of Myanmar, and mindful that today's conference aims to address the situation of all minorities, I would like to focus in particular on the situation of the Rohingya population, which my organization, UNHCR, has worked with for many, many years. Their plight is somehow unique. Not only do they continue to be discriminated, deprived of rights, and abused, a situation they have endured for decades, but they are also caught in one of several ethnic conflicts affecting the country, except it is not their own, the one pitching the Arakan army in Rakhine State against the de facto authorities. The Rohingya people, as we have heard, have faced challenges for a long time, not just in the past 8 years. But 8 years ago, confronted with unspeakable violence at the hands of Myanmar's military, 750,000 fled to Bangladesh. Others became displaced in Rakhine State. With the advances of the Arakan army, which now controls almost all the state, their situation has not improved. Discrimination, the burning of their villages, the exclusion from work and services, the continuous denial of their very identity. The Rohingyas live with the threat of arbitrary arrest and detention. With restricted access to healthcare and education, they cannot move freely. They are subjected to forced labor and forced recruitment. Their lives are defined every day by racism and fear. Madam President, for these reasons, I want to reiterate my gratitude to countries in the region that for years have hosted refugees from Myanmar, and especially Rohingya refugees such as Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand. In particular, I wish to pay tribute to the people and the leadership of Bangladesh. The Honorable Chief Advisor, Professor Yunus, is here, for hosting close to 1.2 million Rohingya refugees. Since the fighting reignited in Rakhine in 2024, as we heard, another 150,000 individuals arrived in Bangladesh seeking safety. Yet, despite enormous challenges, Bangladesh continues to host them, setting an example to the rest of the world, showing us that compassion is still possible at a time when indifference and inaction are sadly fast becoming the norm, showing that giving asylum to refugees saves lives. I appreciate that hosting such a large refugee population, however, is a burden. Therefore, let me praise countries who are taking positive steps to enact policies that allow refugees to build self-reliance. International financial institutions, the World Bank, the the Asian Development Bank in particular, have also played a critical role, providing over $1.25 billion to invest in programs aiming to strengthen both refugee and host community resilience. The private sector, too, is playing its part, and we hope that much more can be done, especially in the critical sectors of education, skills development, and livelihoods. But host countries, as has been repeated many times this morning, cannot shoulder that responsibility alone. The humanitarian response in Bangladesh remains chronically underfunded, including in key areas like food and cooking fuel. The prospects for funding next year are grim. Unless further resources are forthcoming, despite the needs, we will be forced to make more cuts while striving to minimize the risk of losing lives, children dying of malnutrition, or people dying at sea as more refugees embark on dangerous boat journeys. We must do more. Please, I call on all of you. And in addition to funding, it is critical to offer solutions in line with the pledges made at the last Global Refugee Forum. Solutions such as resettlement, as well as other pathways to hope through education or labor mobility. No assistance is too small, especially when the alternative leads to more instability in the region and to more costly measures further down the line. The most important, however, is not to forget that this crisis originates in Myanmar. And that, Madam President, is where the solution lies. We have said this many times. It has been said today here. But we cannot keep going down the path of inertia and somehow expect a resolution while an entire population continues to waste away. The recommendations of the Rakhine Advisory Commission remain as relevant as ever and must inform our engagement towards the voluntary, safe and sustainable return of Rohingya refugees to their homes, as is their right, and with the full involvement, by the way, of refugees themselves. But without taking bolder actions, the situation is unlikely to change, and these are issues that humanitarians cannot resolve alone. Countries with influence in the region must intensify their engagement to help create the conditions for change. I mentioned that point to the diplomatic community when I was in Yangon. This must include efforts to utilize communication channels with all parties to the conflict in Rakhine to convey this message, not only with the de facto authorities, but also the Arakan army. And while recent reconciliatory gestures on their part